Greetings to everyone. My name is Thomas Ward. I serve as professor of peace and development here at Unification Theological Seminary. I want to express my gratitude to Professor Perote, who happens also to be my spiritual father, incidentally, for inviting me to share with you today concerning the role that religion can play in diplomacy. So if you will allow me to do so, I'm going to take a moment now just to bring up my screen, and I'd like to share my PowerPoint with all of you. And that's not the one that I want to share with you, so that will not be great. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to be speaking on the relationship between the United States and North Korea, otherwise known as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and the role that religion can play there that we know based upon history. I'd like to start, though, with a small commercial, particularly for those of you who are second-year students in this program. We have outstanding students at UTS, as many of you are aware, and it's because of my awareness of that and Professor Perote's awareness of that and Dr. Walsh's awareness of that, that I have a lot of confidence that many of you can do very well in terms of finding a really strong internship. And those of you who are second-year students, my point is that now is the time already that you should be thinking about your internship. I just want to share a few things from my experience. I served as the dean of the College of Public and International Affairs at the University of Bridgeport. Before coming to UTS, I was in that role for 18 years. And I had a lot of experiences of students who had internships, and the consequences of those internships is that it gave them a firm footing to be able to do something very significant in terms of the next career movement that they made upon graduation from from UB. These are two students, Joel Amegbo and Baltina Jaloshi, who are there. And those two students, incidentally, both of them interned at the United Nations while they were at the University of Bridgeport. And upon graduation, they were both given full fellowships to do a PhD at George Mason University in its conflict resolution PhD program, which is one of the strongest programs of that type in the United States. This is Laura Guzman. She did her internship from the University of Bridgeport at the International Criminal Court. She wrote an excellent letter of introduction and had a wonderful, well-organized resume, and what was a very big step for her and also for UB to have one of our students be able to go to the International Criminal Court. So I'm looking forward to the day when one of our UTS students in the peace program can do the same thing. This is Shashir Kanal. Shashir Kanal worked as a UN peacekeeping intern, and he eventually then was assigned to Nepal. And upon the completion of his work there, he actually founded the organization called Teach Nepal, which is a major NGO reaching out to various parts of Nepal where people there have not had options to really get an education, and particularly this is true for young children. Veronica De Leon, she did her internship at the Council of Europe, and upon the completion of that, she was offered a position with the Council of Europe. Michiko Seno, she's a second-generation unificationist. She did an internship with the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and upon the completion of that, she was offered a position with the UNDP. She is a career UN professional. She's worked with UNDP, with UNICEF, and UN Women. She's currently stationed with UNICEF. Your internship is very, very important. It will open up the door in an amazing way to the next steps in your life. This is Paula Rengifo. She did her internship at the U.S. Department of State, and she now is a U.S. Department of State career worker. And R.J. Isaac, he did his internship in the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations, and upon the completion of that internship, he was offered a position in the Secretariat of the Secretary General of the United Nations. Bashak Gunnar, she did her internship with United Technologies connected to Sikorsky Helicopter. If you know about Sikorsky Helicopter, She now works full-time as a career officer with United Technologies. So my message for those of you who are second year UTS students in the Peace Program, I just want to let you know that October is the time when you should be thinking about your internship and what possibilities you have. Your internship should be starting in June, early June. And I want to encourage you to look at 3 different types of organizations. Firstly, highly competitive organizations where it's not easy to get an internship. Talking about places like the United Nations or the foreign ministry of your country, a famous NGO such as Save the Children. That's what I call a stretch goal. And I'll be very happy, and others here at UTS will be happy to help you both to organize your resume and to write a letter, which will be able to attract the attention of those types of institutions. Secondly, you can also look at respected organizations, which are more likely that you will be hired at. By the way, I've had lots of students hired that have come in through the UN, gone to places like the UN or the Council of Europe. So I know it's not impossible. It may, so I believe if we're serious about it, it's possible to get some of you into those types of positions. Next, there's a respected organization, maybe in your own country, that you would like to work with, which is maybe easier to prepare for, but you want to also prepare everything for that as well. And finally, there is maybe what I would call a safety or backup internship. That might be with a local charity or a church organization. Depending on the level of internship that you have, that will have an impact upon your career going forward. So I would really strongly encourage you to reach high, reach in the middle, and reach in what is more accessible, all 3. And let's just go with the roll of the dice, and hopefully you will be able to find your dream internship, which will make a huge impact on where you go from here. You should be sending all of the things that you need to do by application, letter, your resume, everything by December. I would love to be able to review your letters of introduction and your resumes. You should write a tailored resume or tailored letter of introduction and a tailored resume for each of the places where you apply. I'm happy to help you with doing that. And we will have some kind of a tutorial soon with Dr. Walsh. But anyways, I want this to be on your radar screen already now. And by April, you should have your placements by then. If you don't have a placement by then most likely you're going to be doing more of a local internship, which is fine. And we'll talk about how you handle that as well when the time comes. So let's go back. We're going to be talking about the US and North Korea relations and the role of religion. So to clarify, first of all, when I say North Korea, or when I say Pyongyang, or when I say the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, it's all the same thing. And in terms of the South Korea, it's called Republic of Korea. Now, we also sometimes refer to North Korea as DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, and I'll be doing that in this lecture, I think quite frequently. And we can also say ROK, which is Republic of Korea. So you're well aware of the ongoing Korean conflict. You also know that this is a war that very quickly could break out into a world war, simply because the United States has commitments, firm commitments to go to the front line to protect South Korea. And China has firm commitments to go to the front line to protect North Korea. So this could easily have huge ramifications should anything happen on the Korean Peninsula. How was Korea divided? It's a very tragic story. But at the Yalta Conference of February 1945, a decision was made that once the European war ended, within 3 months, the Soviet Union would become involved in the Pacific War. And at the Potsdam Conference, a few months later, it was decided that the Soviets would play a role in the Japanese surrender at the close of the war. And what the Soviets asked in return was territory. They wanted a portion of Manchuria, and they also managed to somehow take charge of the surrender of the North so that Korea was divided in half, North and South. Very ironic, no? Because if you think about Germany was divided east and west. It would seem that Japan would have been divided as well, but that's not what happened. Instead, it was not Japan, but it was the colony of Japan, Korea, that ended up being divided. These are just some shots from Pyongyang. It's a beautiful, very attractive city. And this is their most modern hotel. But one quickly recognizes the incredible importance of the military and the role that the military play in North Korea. North Korea has 950,000 active troops compared to South Korea's 625,000 active troops. The North has 420,000 reserve personnel, but the South has 3 million reserves. Now, just to put all this in perspective, the United States has 1.4 million active personnel. That means that combined, the Democratic People's Republic and the Republic of Korea together, they have a larger active military personnel than the United States. Korea has a population of 78 million. The United States has more than 300 million, as you're aware. So very, very militarily focused. US-DPRK relations are not pleasant. There's the Korean War. There was the capture of the USS Pueblo in 1968, Commander Lloyd Booker, where they were held for months and finally were able to be released through some type of an arrangement. In 1976, there was a huge conflagration in what's called the DMZ, or the demilitarized zone, between North and South Korea, involving US soldiers, some of whom were killed through what was referred to as the Axe Incident. There was the 1987 bombing of Korean Air Flight 858, which had, I believe, like half of the Korean presidential cabinet on board. And the woman that's depicted here, she was a North Korean, and she somehow got hold of a Japanese passport and was one of the key figures responsible for this particular bombing. There's been the regular missile launching, which all of us have heard about, and the development by the North of nuclear weapons. They have about 100 nuclear weapons already. And there has been an incredible succession from Kim Il-sung, whom you see on your right, to Kim Jong-il, to Kim Jong-un. If you compare North Korea to the United States, since 1950, the founding of the Koreas, the North has had 3 leaders. The United States has had 14 presidents. If Kim Jong-un should live as long as his grandfather lived, then he would be serving concurrently with 6 additional presidents beyond President Biden. So you can imagine the impact of a country which has had a very limited leadership input, actually input from one single family, which really, in essence, is like almost like the royal family. When Donald Trump met with Kim Jong-un, he joked with him. He said, "Hey, you're the king. You can do whatever you want. You're the king." And there's no question. We're talking about a virtual monarchy, a communist monarchy in the case of North Korea. And DPRK depicts its leaders as demigods or gods, and the United States and Japan and some other Western powers that were involved in the Korean conflict are depicted as demons. There are about 70 large statues throughout North Korea, which eulogize or recognize Kim Il-sung and his son, Kim Jong-il. And there are thousands more that are much smaller models. This is the Sinchon Museum, which is located in North Korea. And this is a museum which points to all of the atrocities which US troops committed against Korea during the Korean conflict. North Koreans being burned alive, being quartered. This depicts a woman who's having a nail pounded into her head by US soldiers. This is a woman basically being savaged by US soldiers. People go to that particular museum, they see all of these images, And then afterwards, they go to what's referred to, you see there on the right, the revenge pledging place, where they make a strong commitment of getting revenge against the United States. So this is something which is very much on the radar screen in North Korea. When Kim Il-sung passed in 1994, he was replaced by Kim Jong-il. And when Kim Jong-il passed, he was replaced by Kim Jong-un. And since Kim Jong-un has come to power, there's also been a variety of circumstances that were shocking. Jang Song-taek on December 13, 2013 was executed because of disloyalty. This was the very uncle of Kim Jong-un, and he's, by the way, this is the person who gave the award to True Father. In December 2013, he was executed, and Kim Yong-jin, vice premier, who was executed because he fell asleep at a meeting where Kim Jong-un was present. This was considered to be a great insult, so that's why that happened. On February 13th, 2017, Kim Jong-nam was assassinated. Oscar Warmbier on the 19th of June, 2017, we know that he was arrested and he eventually would die because of injuries sustained while in North Korea. And this ongoing missile and nuclear weapon testing continues. Between 2003 and 2009, there was what was referred to as the six-party talks, which involved representatives. The taller man with blonde hair, his name is Christopher Hill. He was the US representative in the six-party talks. You have their representatives from Korea, from Japan, from North Korea, from China, and from Russia. They had these talks between 2003 and 2009, talking about the surrender of North Korea's nuclear arsenal. It did not happen, and so the talks ended in 2009. And the next year, there was an attack on Yeonpyeong Island, which is a South Korean island, November 28th, 2010, as a reprisal for the ending of this talk and for the punishing sanctions that were imposed upon North Korea because the talks ended unsuccessfully. Then you had the Trump-Kim talks of 2018, 2019, the aspiration that somehow this was going to solve something. And when those talks broke down, we know that the Inter-Korean Liaison Office, built by South Korea in the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, it was destroyed by the DPRK in June 2020 because, again, of the ending of diplomatic attempts to communicate between the Koreas and between North Korea and the United States. A conflict, we talk about ripeness. Ripeness is the point in a conflict when those participating in the conflict recognize that it might be more in their interest for them to sit at a negotiating table than simply to engage in either military conflict or isolation. Now, we know, for example, that in the case of the USSR, there was an amazing process of ripeness that occurred because of the precipitous deaths of several Soviet leaders, which caught the USSR unprepared. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Soviet Russia, caught it unprepared. Leonid Brezhnev, the long-serving General Secretary of the Communist Party, died in 1982. They picked a younger man, Mr. Andropov, to replace him, but he only lived for about, I think it was like 16 months, and he passed. He was succeeded by Mr. Chernenko. Mr. Chernenko also passed very quickly in 1986. And then Mr. Gorbachev came to power. And we know that it was then that Glasnost came into place. We know that it was also during that period of time that Russia went through a process of opening and finally came to the conclusion that it wanted to make peace with the West. So my question here, the research question, is what role can Track 2 diplomacy, and more specifically Track 2 diplomacy by religious leaders, play in the case of the Koreas? And I want to look at two organizations who have been very involved in the effort to somehow serve in a mediating role with between the two Koreas and between North Korea and the United States. One is the Moon Organization, and the other is the Graham Organization. So I'm talking about Dr. and Mrs. Billy Graham and their son, Franklin Graham. They have been involved in North Korea almost as long as our church. True Parents met with Kim Il-sung in December of 1991. The Grahams began to engage Kim Il-sung in April of 1992. This is a picture of Billy Graham with Kim Il-sung. And this is a picture. Sorry, I probably should have marked him, but on your left, you have on the right, you see a man with a white hat and North Korean with a white suit. Beside him, there is a man with a green hat and green suit, and beside him, you see a Western person with a green jacket and hat. That Western person is Franklin Graham. He's the son of Billy Graham, and by the way, he's visited North Korea on 5 different occasions. Let's begin by talking a little bit about Dr. Hak Ja-han and Reverend Sun Myung Moon and their visit to North Korea, which took place in 1990. This is their photo with Kim Il-sung. And I'd like to talk about how it was that the Moon Organization ended up in Pyongyang, what their experience with Kim Il-sung was, what confidence building measures followed their visit. And I also want to talk about the DPRK and the value of Track 2 diplomacy at the conclusion of this presentation. So this article appeared in the Washington Post in December of 1991, announcing that the Moons had visited North Korea and had held talks with Kim Il-sung. It was stunning news, and it appeared in many places in American media at that time. What was stunning was that just a few years before this, in 1988, a man by the name of Yu Kikimura, who was a member of the Japanese Red Army resided in North Korea. He was arrested on the New Jersey Turnpike on April 12, 1988. By the way, if you're interested in knowing more about this, you see a small image on the right. The New Jersey State Police has an exhibit. They have a museum, and there's an exhibit dealing with Yu Kikimura. He was caught on the New Jersey Turnpike near New York City. He was carrying assault weapons, bombs, and he had a list of targets for planned terrorist attacks. Among the list of targets were Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon. And the FBI notified our church of that because they wanted them to understand that this may not be the only person. But the point is that this is a person who had been groomed for this mission by North Korea. And his goal, among other things, was to destroy the Moon Organization and to eliminate Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon. The amazing thing, that was 1988. And in 2008, about 20 years later, you have a story that appears in the Daily Beast. The Daily Beast, which was, by the way, affiliated with Newsweek magazine. It talks about the Bush administration's secret link to North Korea. And it points to, if you look in the lower corner there, Ju Dong-moon, otherwise known as Douglas Ju, who served at that time as the chairman of the Washington Times. It talked about how between 2004 and 2008, he made frequent trips between Washington and Pyongyang, carrying messages on both sides, and played an important role as an attempt was made during the Bush administration to establish some means of contact and communication with Pyongyang. Another person who some of you know who recently passed, Mr. Antonio Betancourt, also played this type of a role on frequent occasions. And I think many of you are aware, he visited North Korea 17 times, met with Kim Il-sung 5 times, met with Kim Jong-il on 2 different occasions. This was a very serious, what's referred to as Track 2 diplomacy initiative on both sides. On September 5th, 2012, you'll see there that on those of you who can read Korean, the ribbon on the right says Kim Jong-un, and the ribbon on the left says Ko Moon Sun-myung Jongjae Songsang-ul, which means Chairman Moon Sun-myung. So this flower arrangement was sent to honor Reverend Moon at the time of his passing by Kim Jong-un. And 2 days after his passing, on the 5th of September 2012, Reverend Moon was designated by President Kim Jong-un as a hero of reunification because of all of his initiatives to further reunification between North and South Korea and to advance the cause of reconciliation. The Atlantic, many of you are probably aware of the Atlantic, maybe some of you are not, but it's one of the most prestigious publications in the United States. It used to be referred to as the Atlantic Monthly, and it's something that very early on in my career, I knew that it was a very, very important publication. And in an article which appeared in the Atlantic on September 6th, in other words, 3 days after the passing of Reverend Moon, it's a very powerful story about the things that Father Moon did and Mother Moon did in North Korea. The observation is made, his role in North Korea may turn out to be his most enduring legacy. A fascinating story of how one man opened one of the very few cracks in this modern hermit kingdom. So an amazing tribute to Father Moon. How did the Moons get to Pyongyang? Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon, they both left as refugees from North Korea in 1950, and they returned to Pyongyang for the first time in 1991. The road to Pyongyang went through Moscow, because of the World Media Conference, which beginning in 1982 began to send American journalists to Moscow. In the middle of this photo, you have Ambassador Douglas MacArthur II, who is the nephew and namesake of General Douglas MacArthur, who was responsible for the Incheon landing. To his right, you have Mr. Larry Moffat, who played the seminal role in terms of this whole process between 1982 and 1990 of establishing ties with the media in the Soviet Union. This is Ambassador MacArthur speaking with Soviet journalists. And in 1986, with the assumption of power by Mikhail Gorbachev and the opening of Glasnost, which talked about openness, and Perestroika, which talks about restructuring, at that period of time, they began to look at our movement with different glasses. And that led to the door being opened for us to actually have True Parents travel to Moscow in 1990. This is a picture of two of the key officials of Novosti Press. On your left, beside True Father, there you have, Albert Vlasov, who was the president of Novosti Press. And they visited and invited True Parents to come to Moscow, where Father spoke, and that was the Moscow rally. It opened the door to amazing things then. But at that time, also True Father spoke to the Novosti people and talked about some of them who had spent time in North Korea going on his behalf to Pyongyang and to say to Kim Il-sung that he was not Kim Il-sung's enemy and they wanted to meet with him and discuss with him. We know about the meeting with President Gorbachev, and we know that initiatives began, as I said at that time, to reach out to North Korea through Larry Moffat and Antonio Betancourt and others. The Moon's visit to Pyongyang took place in 1991. It was a very warm visit. They did not focus on politics, although Reverend Moon was very frank that Juche thought that the thought of North Korea would not be sufficient to bring about the reunification of the Koreas, and he declared the importance of Godism to do this. And he did it in Korea while he was in North Korea while he was there. He spent that period of time from the 30th of November to December 7th, 1991. I draw your attention to this photo, and you'll see that Father Moon is holding Kim Il-sung's hand. It's sometimes said that once Father takes someone's hand, he never lets go. And I think this is very much true in the case of North Korea. A series of confidence-building measures began after that wonderful meeting where the two of them could really hug each other, refer to each other as brothers, and make a commitment to work together for the reunification of the Koreas. In April of 1992, Josette Sheeran, one of the top reporters of the Washington Times, was sent to North Korea to interview Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung was very pleased with that interview, which was a first, a front page story, and but also goes on for several pages inside the Times at that time of that day. And that particular story, Kim Il-sung appreciated it so much because he recognized that through that particular story, he'd been able to speak rather than people interpret what they thought he meant. He was able to share his thoughts, and he could freely speak. And he expressed his deep appreciation for that particular interview by the Washington Times and that accommodation. The next step that the true parents took was to sponsor a visit of a delegation of former high-ranking US officials to Pyongyang in May of 1992. There's Kim Il-sung in the middle of this delegation. Beside him, you have Congressman Richard Eichord, who led the delegation to the north. You have, that's me behind, as you'll see in the third row. And behind Kim Il-sung, you have Max Hugel, who was the deputy, who had served as the deputy director of the CIA. By the way, all of these people were former. This was not an official visit. It was a track 2 diplomacy visit where people could speak freely and they could explore ways in which to go forward. This is John Holdridge, who was the former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia. This is Ambassador Douglas MacArthur II, who had served as the Assistant Secretary for Political Liaisons for the United States Department of State, and who was the namesake of General Douglas MacArthur. This is Governor David Cargo, who was the former governor of New Mexico. And all of these people here that you see, they're all former US congressmen. This was a very high-level delegation. And the goal of the delegation was actually to seek ways to convince North Korea to stop its use of abusive rhetoric when referring to the United States and when referring to South Korea. Always the United States is the Yankees, and always South Korea was the running dogs, the Yankee running dogs. So they wanted some gesture of respect. And Congressman Eichord gave a copy of Abraham Lincoln's memoirs to Kim Il-sung at that time. He gave him this beautiful Remington sculpture as well. And we had a meeting with Kim Il-sung. We sat at a large table. This is a North Korean table, but I want to emphasize that the table that we sat at was twice as big as this one. My guess is that when Kim Il-sung passed, that went to the museum with him. But we sat at that table, and a decision was made prior to that, which was probably not a wise decision. And the decision was that the only person who would speak to Kim Il-sung during that meeting was Congressman Eichord. Everybody else sat there. They had a million things to say, but because they'd made that determination, the decision was that no one else would speak. Now, the interesting thing is that it was very, very awkward, the meeting. Here's Kim Il-sung, who had dealt with Stalin, who had dealt with Mao, who had dealt with Truman, who had had all kinds of experiences, you know. And then there was this small Missouri congressman, nice guy, humble, but he had no context by himself to meet with Kim Il-sung. It was kind of embarrassing to hear the exchange between the two of them. And certainly it was not what was anticipated or hoped for, if you will. And quite frankly, the delegation became quite unhappy afterwards with what happened. And they were very, very critical of Congressman Eichord. The next day, we went out to the airport. It was time for us to leave. It was June 2nd. We'd been there for a week. And at the tarmac, just as we were ready to get into the plane, I was there with my luggage and everything. Just as I was ready to get into the plane, Congressman Eichord turned to me and said, "Tom, you have to stay here." North Korea? And he said, "You have to stay here." And he said, we need to work out something on dealing with the matter of abusive rhetoric. And I need someone here. I think part of it was really to save face because the ending had been very awkward with a lot of quibbling. And also part of it was because the task was not done. And so I ended up spending another week in North Korea, just myself with the North Korean officials. They were very polite with me. I have to say it was a good experience, you know, and things went well. I drafted a statement and I presented the statement. And I was told by this is me with Kim Il Sung. By the way, everybody who was on that delegation has a photo like this. So it's not like Kim Il Sung and I were best of buddies. I just happened to have been lucky enough to be there and have a chance to have a photo with him, as was everybody else who was there. But I stayed there and we worked on protocols relating to language. I drafted a statement, and that statement I gave to this gentleman here. This is Mr. Kim Young-sun. Kim Young-sun served at that time as the liaison for North-South relations. And you see, I'm in this photo. This was another occasion when I was with him. That was at the United Nations in New York. Anyways, we worked on this and drafted it, and he liked what I put together. However, the DPRK's Minister of Information didn't like it. And for that reason, there was not a consensus on what would be done. So I left Pyongyang on June 6th, 1992. And when I left, I was informed at that time that, something was going to be done and that they would contact me. They were going to do something that was consistent with what the delegation hoped for, which was addressing this concern about abusive rhetoric. And I received a phone call on the 23rd of June, and I was asked to come to meet with Ambassador Ho Jung, who was the DPRK permanent representative to the United Nations, and to bring Congressman Eichord with me, which I did. And we met there at that particular time. And when we met at that particular time, we learned that basically Kim Il Sung felt that he needed to do something because, first of all, Father and Mother Moon had come to North Korea. Secondly, there had been this wonderful interview in the Washington Times where he was able to speak freely. And thirdly, there was this high-ranking delegation of former officials that had all come and honored him, if you will, and shown that he was taken seriously as a head of state and not just as a renegade. And based around that, Ambassador Ho explained to us that every year from the 25th of June until July 27th in North Korea, they have what's referred to as Hate America Month. And that has taken place since 1953. June 25th is the day that the Korean War broke out, and July 27th is the day when that war, the armistice was signed, ending the hot conflict, if you will. And what he told us was that for the first time since 1953, Hate America Month was going to be canceled or suspended. It would be suspended. These are just showing you some of the things the kinds of posters and things that were there. And he asked Congressman Eichord to convey this to the White House. And he said, do you know why I'm asking you, Congressman Eichord, to convey this to the White House, rather than go through Ambassador James Lilly in Beijing, which is the official channel to communicate between Pyongyang and Washington, D.C.? He said, I'm speaking to you and I'm conveying this to the two of you because President Kim wants to make sure that Reverend Moon gets the credit for this. He wants the White House to know that it was because of Reverend Moon that this decision was made. So this was a very, very important step, a momentous step in terms of US-DPRK relations, a symbolism of great significance. Now, there were a variety of long-term confidence-building initiatives that followed after that time. Many of you know that we set up a hotel near Kumgangsan, which is the beautiful North Korean mountains there. That's a beautiful place, believe me, just beautiful. Hope that those of you who have not can have a chance to visit there. And also we constructed the World Peace Center in Pyongyang, where people of our church, they even gather on Sunday for church services and things like that. And there's a variety of peace events that DPRK uses this building for as well. The Pyeonghwa Motors, we helped to set up an automobile factory there, which is still in place, although we're no longer involved in that, but our relations remain very, very strong in that project. And when Kim Il Sung passed on July 8th, 1994, Antonio Betancourt was in Pyongyang at that time, and Dr. Bo Hee Pak was the only South Korean who traveled from South Korea to Pyongyang in order to honor Kim Il-sung at his passing. And it was very, very meaningful for North Korea. This is a photo of Dr. Park with Kim Jong-il, the son of Kim Il-sung, who assumed power after this. He really deeply was touched that Dr. Park came. Dr. Park went through a lot of difficulty after that, a lot of persecution, but eventually that was solved because the South Korean government was not happy that he went. But because he went, basically, it just deepened this tie. The Little Angels traveled to North Korea, and likewise, a North Korean dance troupe traveled to the South. All of this sponsored by Dr. Park Jae-han Moon and Reverend Sun Myung Moon. And then in November of 2001, on the 10th anniversary of the Moon's visit to Korea, Dr. Peter Kim, who had replaced Dr. Bo-hee Park as Reverend Moon's special assistant, traveled to North Korea in order to honor and to recollect that visit by the Moons and the kind way in which North Korea had received Father Moon. And I mentioned Antonio Betancourt, who recently passed. He traveled there 17 times. And he received a special award for the key diplomatic role that he played during that period of time. There's also Mr. Park Sang-kwan, who has served as the principal go-between between True Parents and North Korea for more than 30 years. Can you imagine that? Going back like the stable point. Last year, he was officially made an honorary citizen of Pyongyang. The deep appreciation for that tie-in. And every time there's a birthday, every time there's an event, all of you are aware that flowers, gifts come from the north to the south. I still recall one event where even they sent two beautiful puppies to True Mother in order to just express their appreciation for her, their admiration and love for her. And as I've noted already, Father Moon passed on September 3rd, 2012. And 2 days later, he was given the Hero of Reunification Award. And the work continues now, as you know. True Mother is working with former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And also she is working together with Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen on a variety of projects to really strengthen ties between the Koreas and eventually see their reunification. Let me turn my attention now to the Graham Organization. The Graham Organization also has very unique ties to the North that probably most people are not aware of. Billy Graham is a towering religious figure in the history of the United States. And there's probably no question that likewise with him, there were reasons why he was important to go there. Billy Graham had spent time with Harry Truman, who was president at the time of the Korean War. He'd spent time with Dwight Eisenhower. You see the yellow arrows there. With John F. Kennedy. He spent time with Gerald Ford, with Jimmy Carter, with Ronald Reagan, with Bill Clinton, with George Bush, with Barack Obama. His picture's not there, but also with Richard Nixon, with Donald Trump. All US presidents spent time with Billy Graham. So it was an important thing to be able to have, likewise, there's I'm sorry, maybe you couldn't see that picture. That's a Billy Graham with Richard Nixon. It was important that, therefore, that likewise, that Billy Graham went there. That was a very symbolic gesture, and his visit was very meaningful for the North. And excuse me, having a little technical problem. Most of you may not know, this is a picture in China, but actually this is Billy Graham with his wife, Ruth Graham. Ruth Graham was born in China, and she grew up in China. But she spent 3 years of her middle school studies in Pyongyang. There was a Pyongyang Christian women's school where she studied, and she spent 3 years there. So she had personal ties from years back with Pyongyang. This was prior to the Japanese kind of takeover of the cultural takeover of the North, when they became very hard on Christianity. When that started to happen, then Ruth Graham had to return to the United States. But she spent 3 years there. She had a special affection for North Korea. One of Ruth Graham's brothers has a son who's married to a Korean woman whose family comes from North Korea. So the Grahams literally have a nephew, likewise, who has ties with North Korea. Why were the Grahams interested in going to North Korea? Well, the one thing were those family ties that were there, but there was also an issue which concerned them. There's an article which appeared in 2017, which points out that there was an incredible persecution in the North of Christianity. It was seen as a serious threat. And they felt that through Christianity, somehow the government was threatened. And one of the things that the Grahams wanted to show was that the Kim should not see Christianity as a threat to their rule. When Billy Graham traveled to Moscow back in 1984, he met with one of the key Soviet officials, and he said to him, the religious believers are some of the USSR's best citizens. They're honest, they're hardworking, they're not prone to the common Soviet problems of absenteeism, alcohol, and theft. And he told Pomerov that Americans found it hard to understand why Christians in the USSR could not practice and propagate their beliefs as freely as non-believers. He said, look, these are good people. They can be good citizens of the USSR. And Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son, said precisely the same type of thing concerning Christians in North Korea. In an interview which took place on June 12, 2018, Franklin Graham said to North Korea, Christians are not your enemies. And he talked about the fact that Christians are taught to pray for the leaders of their government, and that therefore, likewise, North Korea, the same as the Soviets, should not see Christianity as a threat. When Billy Graham first traveled to North Korea in 1992, he gave to Kim Il-sung a copy of the Bible, not surprisingly. And I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but Kim Il-sung was raised as a Christian. His mother was a Christian. His grandfather on his mother's side was actually a Presbyterian pastor. So, and Kim Il-sung himself, obviously, he felt that Christianity was connected to capitalism, but at the same time, he openly recognized that Christian patriots, the March 1st movement that we talk about, that they played a very key role in the independence of the North. So therefore, he has a certain respect for Christianity, although at the same time a deep distrust. But basically, that the respect side was rekindled, if you will, through that visit by Billy Graham. And Billy Graham made a second visit to North Korea in 1994, when during the presidency of Bill Clinton, it was determined that indeed the North Koreans were on the verge of producing nuclear weapons. And Billy Graham says that he met with Kim Il-sung at that time, and when he met with Kim Il-sung at that time, that somehow Kim Il-sung had indicated to him that he was going to take certain steps in order to mollify the concerns that existed about the nuclear weapons in the North. And Kim Il-sung and Billy Graham, they did have a warm relationship. We know the record shows that. In 1997, Billy Graham's wife, Ruth Graham, visited to North Korea. This is, by the way, one of the 2 or 3 churches that exist in the North. There are very few that remain, but there are a few, and these are kind of official and government observed, surveyed, if you will, churches. But she went there and she spent time. She visited the place where her school had been located. The school has been destroyed during the war, but she visited that place and she visited old friends. And likewise, that was a very important gesture showing this tie-in. And as I mentioned, Billy Graham's son, Franklin, has visited the DPRK on 5 different occasions. This is an occasion when he's bringing certain types of protection, I think, for the rice crops during the winter in North Korea. This is some dental equipment that he brought. He's brought in about $12 million of aid to North Korea, different shapes and forms. This is him with a certain gift which he brought to North Korea at a certain time for Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Un. As far as I know, Franklin Graham never met with Kim Jong Il or Kim Jong Un or Kim Il Sung, but he did meet with many of the high officials there. And this is him. I think I showed this photo earlier with him bringing some special medical equipment, likewise, to help with the hospitals in the north. And many of you are aware that Dennis Rodman visited North Korea on 2 occasions. He's a very famous Hall of Fame basketball player in the United States, one of the best defense players of all time. And Kim Jong-un had a great admiration for him. And basically, Kim Jong-un really was hoping that through that would be a gesture to reach out to President Barack Obama. And interestingly, Franklin Graham made a very strong appeal to President Barack Obama, saying, look, you really should abide by what Dennis Rodman said. Why don't you reach out to Kim Jong-un? Reach out to him as a friend, not as an official, just reach out to him as a friend. Let's begin to have some personal relations between the two of you, and that can open the door to other possibilities in the future. So lobbying, if you will, really to improve ties between Korea and the North. He also, the United States and North Korea. He also has campaigned in order to bring food, and did bring food to North Korea at different times when they went through some of their crises in terms of food. And likewise, when George Bush, two things, he really, Franklin Graham was not a big supporter of the 6-party talks, which we talked about already. That is the talks with China, Russia, North Korea, the United States, Japan, South Korea. He said, no, that's not going to be the way that this is going to work. The way that this can work is that you, George Bush, you have to reach out personally to Kim Jong-il. You have to establish a personal relationship. The key to everything here is building personal relationships. So he advocated for that very strongly. And likewise, he was very strongly against sanctions on the North. He emphasized, and you know, he appeared in the media in various venues for this, saying, look, it's not going to help to have sanctions. What we need is personal relations. There are no personal relations. The walls of distrust are so strong. And the way to address those things is we have to begin to build personal relations. Likewise, as I mentioned, he really encouraged Barack Obama to sit down and to meet with Kim Jong-un. And he also advised Donald Trump when Donald Trump traveled to the North, and really tried to support that effort again. And was during that period of time also that he emphasized strongly that Christians are not enemies of the North, and that the North should recognize that. So let's close by talking a little bit about Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un, don't forget, he has nuclear weapons, almost 100 nuclear weapons, as I mentioned. And to his south, there are 28,000 US troops. Why are those troops at the 38th parallel? They're there for a simple reason, so that the North understands, if you attack South Korea, you will have attacked the United States. Because the first front line that you're going to face is the United States. And the United States, if you attack our troops, are going to respond in a fierce way. So he's very aware of that. He feels the pressure from the United States. Also, there are all kinds of things that are dropped into North Korea. Propaganda from the South, propaganda from former North Korean refugees that have come south and who basically are very open about their criticisms of the North and what's going on there, and trying to awaken the people to stand up against the government. And likewise, there are all these human rights organizations that are out there that are saying, you know, we have to put Kim Jong-un on trial for enormous human rights violations that he's been guilty of. But are we seeing the big picture in all these things? Or the call to end North Korean genocide? You know, there's a large number of North Koreans who find themselves in detention camps because of their political beliefs or behaviors, things that they've done. So to conclude, you know, Erich Honecker, Idi Amin, and Ferdinand Marcos are three dictators who, at the conclusion of their time in power, Honecker in East Germany, Idi Amin in Uganda, Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, they all escaped. They fled their countries because they realized that there was no hope. But what about Kim Jong-un? Is he going to flee? Should there suddenly be pressure placed upon him? Saddam Hussein didn't flee. Muammar Gaddafi didn't flee. So what about Kim Jong-un? What's on his mind? Well, one thing that's on his mind is what happened to Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi, as you know, in 2012, he was torn apart by a mob, tortured and executed. And we know that 8 years before that, what did Muammar Gaddafi do? He gave up his nuclear weapons 8 years before that. And he tried to make a gesture of peace. You know, if you look at his work from 2004, he was trying to enter into the community of nations. He was making that kind of an effort. However, the Arab Spring began. He tried to stop the Arab Spring, and very quickly, the countries that had made a whole variety of assurances to him, they turned on him. And North Korea can't forget that. This is a quote by one of the North Korean officials. It has been shown to the corners of the earth that Libya's giving up its nuclear arms was used as an invasion tactic to disarm the country by sugarcoating it with words like the guaranteeing of security and the bettering of relations. Having one's own strength was the only way to keep the peace. So that is the mindset of North Korea. They're not in a big hurry because they know as soon as we give up our weapons, the next thing is the human rights activists will be there calling for all those who have been involved in human rights activities to be sent to The Hague or to be tried in Pyongyang and executed. Conclusion. Ultimately, we have to understand peace is realized between nations. Ripeness, however, does not necessarily come only through interstate relations. It can come through Track 2 initiatives. Track 2 and Track 3 efforts, Track 3 are people-to-people efforts, can be conducive to the furtherance of ripeness. Religious NGOs can serve as occasional vehicles in identifying a moment of ripeness. Contact and communication among all actors, talking about first and secondary actors in conflict transformation, is very, very important. There were a variety of religious actors who helped to stop violence. Mohandas Gandhi, the tactics chosen by Gandhi for the independence movement in India saved millions of lives. And his satyagraha, his whole process of peace, if you will, that served as the basis upon which his nonviolence served as the basis upon which almost 1 billion people gained their freedom from Britain. Archbishop Desmond Tutu played a very key role in ending apartheid in South Africa. On the one hand, there were violent-ridden initiatives, but it was Desmond Tutu who played a key role in reaching out to many countries in the international community. He played a key role in the boycotts, etc., which eventually brought down the white minority government and for there finally to be a government by the people. And then there's also the case of the community of Sant'Egidio in Mozambique, which I'm just going to briefly mention. Let me go back and let me mention one other thing first of all. Pearl Harbor took place December 7th, 1941. You know, I've had a chance to go through the documents. I live in Hyde Park, New York. This is where the Roosevelt Presidential Library is. I've had a chance to go through all of the documents that are available there, at least, concerning the outbreak of World War II. And if you read those documents, what you discover is that there was a commitment, first of all, to make sure that Japan did not become too powerful. And that commitment included kind of blocking Japan's access to various types of things that they needed, raw materials, oil, other things that were needed in order to build a powerful nation, in order to build a military machine. As a consequence of that, we can say that, I'm sorry, excuse me here. The Tojo cabinet in World War II, they were pretty serious about wanting to have war. But at least one of them, Yoshimichi Hara, he was a person who stood out and said, no, we don't want to go to war with the United States. We don't want to do that. Let's try to pursue every other channel possible before we avoid that. But at some point, he gave up. He felt that there was no willingness on the part of the United States. And he likewise finally signed on and said, yes, we have to go to war. But the point is that the signaling, the change in Hara's attitude, if there had been track 2 diplomats involved, that would have been known. And the United States might have taken different types of measures, although I'm not convinced of that, but they might have taken different types of measures if they had understood how much the things that they were doing were absolutely infuriating Japan, which, as you know, has a tendency to be quite, Japanese diplomats tend to be quite mild and don't easily come forward with their actual feelings and thoughts in a public square. Franklin Graham spoke about North Korea and said it this way: I think that the North Koreans have been wanting to talk to the Americans for a long time. He described the North Koreans as a prideful people that just want to be shown respect. That's his insight into it. In the case of Mozambique, you had an amazing situation where you had 2 different forces. One was called Frelimo, French de Libération de Mozambique. And then you had another called Renamo, which was Renascimento de Mozambique. And these 2 struggling organizations, that one stood to the left, one stood to the right. They had developed armies. They were fighting with each other. Frelimo controlled the government. Renamo was a threat to them. They were being supported by the white government of South Africa. And at some point, that conflict became ripe, and they began to feel, wouldn't it be good maybe for us to stop all this killing and begin to sit down together at a table and to discuss and see whether there's a way we can work out our differences. But they knew that they couldn't do that without a mediator. And they couldn't trust the United States because the United States they felt was too much on the side of Renamo. They couldn't trust Europe for a variety of reasons, and they didn't really trust the United Nations. So who could be a broker, if you will, that both sides could trust? They chose this small religious organization that did social work, that came from Rome, which was called Sant'Egidio, the community of Sant'Egidio. And they asked that group to serve in the facilitating or mediating role, which they did between 1990 and 1992. They could win confidence of both sides. They could encourage both sides to talk, to forgive, to relate, to communicate with each other. And all of that culminated with the Rome Peace Accords that were signed on November 4th, 1992, marking the end of the conflict between these 2 warring factions in Mozambique. Could the same thing happen in the case of North Korea? Could a religious group or religious leaders play a key role in terms of the confrontation between North and South Korea? Potentially. That's not something that can be seen at this time. But what is clear is that both of these organizations are playing a very important communicative role in terms of somehow keeping channels open when the government channels close down on so many different occasions. Christianity has been involved in North Korea since the 19th century. And as I said, there are ties between Kim Il-sung, in particular, with that Christian foundation that exists in America, and in South Korea. Can that be revived again? That's a question that remains open. It's something that we will have to all see. But what is clear is that the communication that is in place is something that needs to be preserved. So I hope that this has been helpful to all of you. I thank you for your kind attention. I'm sorry if I went on a little bit longer maybe than you anticipated, but God bless you and continue to enjoy your great class with Dr. Perrottet. Thank you very much. Don't forget your internships,